Great. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Laura. Thanks for having me again. I feel like I was just talking with Dave in the back here. I feel like I've been to a lot of these and definitely been growing. So I think it's, it's really sort of demonstrative of, I think, the growth and the importance of local. And now you think about mobile and local that have become kind of fused at the hip. And now you start to see about all the horizontal sort of things that spawn from that. It's really exciting. So appreciate you taking some time out. I'm going to talk to you about something that I hope I will try and make interesting and informative. And that's about really a case study whereby we've taken mobile and we've actually fused mobile with television, regular television, linear television. This isn't addressable TV. And we've been able to use mobile to essentially measure the effectiveness of linear television to drive consumers to a physical location, into a store. And I'm also going to talk about some of our thoughts and observations more broadly around, so if this is the beginning of a trend, right, whereby mobile is becoming this kind of connected device across consumers' lives and these different media silos, what does that really mean? So, I think the first thing to talk about, and look, you guys are obviously an educated crowd, but if you think about this idea of mobile, what do we mean by mobile? And obviously, it's a cliche to say mobile is evolving. I think a really important thing to note is, so I was at Recode last week, and I was in a crowd where Mary Meeker did her usual, 74 slides in like 15 minutes. And one of those, of course, was the classic attention dollar gap, whereby you've got mobile has this much attention, and the dollars are still here. Therefore, more dollars are going to come into mobile advertising. And I actually fundamentally disagree with the premise of that. This idea that just because as a consumer you spend X number of minutes viewing a certain medium, I don't think that necessarily means that display dollars have to match that medium. And I think we all inherently agree the fact that just because you spend a tremendous amount of time on your mobile phone doesn't mean that the advertising experience has to be the same as the TV or print. I also think the data that is created from mobile itself is something that people forget, right? Those dollars that aren't necessarily going to flow into advertising on the mobile device. So I think there'll be even more dollars created from the fact that the mobile device is more than an advertising medium. It is this new way of understanding consumer behavior. And if you think about that, right, we all inherently know this, but it's worth reiterating these points. Behaviors now are no longer analog and digital, right? You used to have this idea of behaviors were, hey, I got my experience segments, and I've got Nielsen, who goes and surveys a bunch of people. And then it had this thing where you had these digital behaviors, whereby people were looking at cookies you visited and websites you visited. And then you had very much digital and everything else. Well, now everybody's behaviors are becoming digitally cataloged, right? You're all here interacting with your devices. You're transacting. You've got various screens. There's wearables. There's fitness devices that are sharing data. And as you know, you're moving through this cloud of digital data. So worth remembering, these things are getting fused together. Your behaviors now are all digital, even if they perceive to be analog. And if you think about, obviously the other cliche point that's worth sort of just reiterating, we've now got, close to 200 million consumers in this country with smartphones. And, that's remarkable in itself. But to me, the smartphone was always the first wearable, right? It's pretty much on your person most of the time. And you think about the fact that these devices obviously are capturing transactions, environmental factors. They're obviously location aware. And suddenly you think, hey, we can now understand, let's take one thing that's near and dear to all of us, the physical movements and behaviors of consumers from location-aware devices. You stop and think about that. For the first time in history, you've now got almost the majority of the population of a big country. You can understand where these people go in the world. In the olden days, you would go up to somebody who'd been to a car dealership, and you would say, what other car dealerships did you go to? And you might get an answer that's truthful or not. Now you can observe that behavior. That's a fundamental paradigm shift. And that ultimately results in this sort of connection between the physical and digital world. And I think that's a really compelling paradigm. So here's a cliched slide that says, look, if you think about this from a marketing and advertising perspective, we are at the beginning of the end of being able to fold these silos together, right? This idea that you can now start to say, hey, I'm not going to treat my video versus social versus print versus out-of-home advertising differently and in a siloed fashion. They should all be connected because it's the same goddamn consumers that see these ads that are exposed to them. So I'm going to frequency cap across them. I'm going to intelligently place out-of-home billboards to speak to the right people. I'm going to have my TV ads work in conjunction with my mobile ads, et cetera, et cetera. We all know this future is coming. It's still a long way off. But the news from our perspective is it's here from a technology perspective, right? The big issue is really the processes internally in the agencies and the advertisers to be able to shift buying into this new kind of world. So enough sort of, setting this thing up. If you think about the idea of TV, linear TV, how interesting would it be if you could take linear TV and you could make it measurable like digital? So really, the setup here is, this is a campaign we ran last year whereby we took mobile, we took TV, and we said, what would happen if we combine the two? We combine mobile and TV. And I'm going to explain how we do that. So the first question is, well, hang on a sec. How do you connect mobile to TV? So we do that with a company called Rentrack. Rentrack has tens of millions of set-top boxes. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And those set-top boxes are obviously DVRs and PVRs, et cetera. They have their software running on those boxes, and they can see anonymously the television viewing habits of those set-top boxes. And now what we can do is, because linear TV has a lot of regulation, it's difficult to go one-to-one there. We use location as a match. We look at all the set-top boxes where they dwell, which is in residences, and we can now match that to the mobile devices that anonymously dwell in those same residences. And in some areas, that is a poor match, and in some areas, it's a very good match. You can imagine in the skyscrapers, it becomes challenging. But the news is, we know when we have a good match and when we have a bad match. So there's a confidence level there. We match these things together, and now, obviously, we are able to understand, target, and analyze and measure television viewership through the mobile device. Again, we're connecting set-top boxes to mobile devices, so we can inherently now connect television viewership to the physical world. And that obviously has some interesting ramifications. One of them being, if you can connect television to mobile, and mobile is this location-aware medium, you can start to understand the behaviors of people who are watching certain television shows and networks. And you can do all sorts of things with that, right? You can analyze, you can target, and one of the things we're going to talk about here is you can measure. One way you can measure is understanding where people went in the world. And some of you, I think many of you are familiar now with this paradigm of place visitation, real-world attribution. This was something we brought to market about 3 years ago where we said, hey, if we expose people to advertisements on devices that are location aware, we can then subsequently look at an exposure window post-exposure and say, how many of those devices that we exposed did we see physically show up with location within the polygon of a high-value, large footprint location that we've isolated and drawn on top of satellite data. And we have a high confidence they're inside this store, this automotive dealership, et cetera. And we call that place visit rate. It's almost like an industry standard now. And then we said about a year and a half ago, well, if we have this TV data, then maybe we could hook up place visit rate to TV. So we swap out the mobile ad, or we put a mobile ad in conjunction with TV. And now, because that television exposure is associated to this mobile device, we can now say how many people who saw a television advertisement, a show, watched a particular network, went to a particular location. So making television measurable in the same way that digital is measurable. So you look at the campaign setup here, reasonably complex campaign. So I'll take a couple of slides to set this up. So we can measure visitation. We can understand television viewership. So we're going to combine television viewership with mobile advertising, with households, and measure visitation to a retailer. So if you think about, again, question might be in your mind, well, how big is the scale to this thing, right? So this is a nationwide campaign. We're working with a retailer. We're working with a TV network, working with an agency. And if you look at the green line here, the green line is the number of Rentrack set-top boxes that we have in our database. So you can see this has tremendous scale to it. This isn't, we got 30,000 people to volunteer their TV viewership habits, and we extrapolated out. This is all observed data. So it's real observed data, and that is a paradigm that I think is really important. So retailer, agency, TV network, running a set of TV ads for this retailer, and we're now using mobile to complement those ads in some regards and also measure visitation. And essentially, the way this looked is there's 3 groups, 2 of which we targeted, 3 of which we measured. The first group is essentially households and consumers that we did not expose to TV advertising. We did not expose to mobile advertising. That is the control group. We're measuring their visitation to the store. The second group is essentially people who are just watching the advertising on TV, did not show them a mobile ad. Third group, we showed them a TV ad. They were exposed to the television ad. They chose to watch it. And then we showed them a complementary mobile ad as well. And now we're measuring their visitation from a time window 30 days from the last ad exposure. So first group, the percentage of people we saw in the first group visiting the location, 0.1%. Remember, no TV, no mobile. The second group, television advertising, 0.9%, so almost twice as high. And now the third group, we now see a 4x lift. So suddenly we're saying 4 times higher visitation from the group that are exposed to TV as well as mobile. And we were pretty excited about this. And then the client, the network, turned around and said, let's slice this a different way. I want you to split 2 groups with a commonality that both these groups already visit my store. So let's look at everybody in your system, PlaceIQ, that visits my store. And now I want to see the visitation frequency by the people who watched the TV ad versus didn't. And almost exactly the same lift. So slicing it a completely different way, just using mobile as the measurement mechanism, we saw the same lift. And this was with one of the largest sort of TV conglomerates in the world. And they put us through the ringer. Like, this took 6 months to get the results back. They had to verify them. So they made us look at this from every different perspective. So this is really powerful stuff, right, to be able to say not only can we target and measure, but we can, no matter how we slice the data, we see the same results. And then, of course, you can now start to say, you can go even deeper. This is the magic of using mobile and the physical world behaviors we see. We can now see this dotted line is the standard visitation we see across 100 million consumers in the US. Where do they normally go versus the group that we targeted? You can understand competitive cross-shopping behaviors. Then you can start to say, do they go to the movies? What types of TV stations do they watch, separately? What types of places do they dine, et cetera, et cetera? So a whole new set of insights and analytics that TV guys have never had available before. So sort of wrapping this up with a few things, right? So look, we could say here that, great, we were able to drive and understand a really impressive lift by measuring television viewership and visitation and then complementing that with a mobile ad. But I think a really compelling thing is, and this is what I want to leave you guys with, you think about this idea of, as I started with at the beginning, mobile is so much more than just, hey, its own siloed media channel that happens to have all these attributes. But mobile essentially is this sort of new connective element that allows you to build this new model for consumer behavior. You've got movement data that we've talked about, right? That's fantastic, this new type of data. But if you can tie that new type of data back to third-party information, such as TV viewership, retail purchase, auto ownership, you can now create the relationships between behaviors in the physical world and these incredibly powerful existing data sets that have huge spends. And now you can connect this to DMPs, to CRM systems, to enterprise systems. You can say things like, let's look at everybody in my DMP who looked at an automotive website. What page did they go to on an automotive website that resulted in the highest visitation to a car dealership, right? Was it the Find the Dealer page, or was it the Car Configurator page? You can now start to unlock behaviors across all these enterprise systems. And then you imagine, well, by fusing this together and getting this new model for consumer behavior, we can target, we can measure, we can analyze that we never had before, but we can understand in a new way. And what's really, really compelling about this is, this isn't something whereby, well, great, you can take this new learning and you can put it out on mobile advertising, but you can extend this through these new identity graphs to display and video and social. You can also extend this to TV. We're doing addressable TV as well. But now you can say, there's a whole host of other things you can extend this new mobile learning and knowledge to. Out-of-home advertising, where to put my billboards, how do I send emails more effectively based upon visitation and analytics? How do I understand how to send direct mail? How do I plan my store locations based upon this new dynamic data? These are things that we're doing in the market right now, and we're seeing some of our most advanced customers really leaning into this. And the exciting thing for me in conclusion, right, I mean, I've been at this now for sort of 15, 20 years in this sort of broad industry, and if you say, where the hell is all this going? The thing I've started saying is, right, the really, really powerful, exciting thing about all of this is that I was sold a vision when I moved to the Valley in the late 90s of one-to-one marketing. The internet is going to create the ability for brands and advertisers to interface and speak with people in a way that is personalized and contextual and relevant, and we're all going to have these one-to-one relationships. And we know, with some exceptions, that didn't really necessarily happen, right? You might argue that you go into Amazon and they have a really good understanding of what you bought, but in general, advertising and digital advertising still hasn't really fulfilled that goal. And I believe that the mobile device, with all this new data that it's collecting, location and local being a huge element to that, really is the central device to consumers that's going to deliver this long-awaited dream and promise of one-to-one marketing, whereby the advertising you receive across not just mobile, but all these different mediums is going to be relevant, contextual, and hopefully start to look, less like blinking app install ads and more like your Amazon recommendations that are really, really relevant and personalized. And that's, that's the takeaway, and that's the thing that gets us excited and up every day, and the thing that really gets excited about this industry. So with that, hopefully that was interesting, but I appreciate your time, and thanks very much.